All right, David, I want to talk to you today about an insecurity I've experienced since our last episode.
Sounds good.
I, and so my name is Liao, and I am a licensed psychologist based in Seattle.
My name's David. I'm a licensed psychologist in the Phoenix, Arizona area.
So after we recorded our episode, I felt really insecure about how inarticulate I was. I After the episode, I immediately felt like, oh my gosh, I really um, spoke I had a lot of pauses like I am doing now, a lot, a lot of and I spoke, I use a lot of fragmented sentences, I think,
Yeah.
like incomplete sentences. So I just had this feeling like, oh my gosh, that was like, I really messed up. And then, of course, I was like, okay, maybe that was just my own perception. And let me kind of, maybe I actually did better than I thought I did, right? Because, like most people, I probably am harsher on myself than perhaps how other people see me. But then when I rewatched the episode, I was doing the timestamp, and I actually thought I was like objectively being very inarticulate. Like I really noticed, as I said, a lot of us and ums, and also the fragmented sentences, right? And probably a lot of like grammatical errors, right? So it just kind of brought up this, insecurity that I have, right, about my language ability, how well spoken I am or not. So I want to, yeah, like use this episode to kind of process this with you. Kind of how I help myself as a psychologist. And also, I'm sure I have like blind spots, and I'm really curious to hear your perspective as well, right? Because obviously you are a psychologist as well. Um,
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say thank you for your vulnerability, for being so open. I think, lots of people who try to create content, for whatever reason, really want to be successful, or even if you're just doing something totally different, really want to be good at it and try to hide it when they don't do well, right? Or I'm just going to improve. I'm going to try not to show people. So I think it's really brave and admirable that you would actually want to create an episode about talking about how hard it is, or feeling insecure, because it is something that I think um, a lot of us experience.
yeah, thank you. I hope that that by being vulnerable, the listeners can relate, right? That like us psychologists also have our own insecurities, and we're not perfect. And
Yeah.
um, so I think that the insecurity partly comes from English as not being my first language, right? So I came
Sure.
to the US when I was 11. And so I know that I often have grammatical errors when
Well,
I speak.
I'm so sorry. Can I pause you for just a second, Liang?
Yeah.
I just want to, and we do this, Liang and I also, when we work with clients as well, although this is not what we're going to do here, it's not therapy, but I just want to get a sense of, for orientation, what it is that you want today to be about, or what is your goal for today for our conversation, our time together?
Yeah. I think the first thought that comes to mind is like, well, okay, how do I overcome this being inarticulate? Right? How can I be more articulate?
Mm.
Uh, and then the second question related to that is like, well, how do I know like being relaxed will help me be more myself.
Mhm.
And so a related question is like, well, how do I relax? Right. And so, and this maybe is how I imagine a lot of people feel when they maybe have to do a presentation, when they have to do a job interview, where it's like, okay, how can I present myself the best I can? And to do that, right, I need to feel relaxed. And then how do I relax?
So it sounds like you're saying you want to better understand what's going on for you that leads you to be inarticulate, so
Right.
that both externally you're able to actually present yourself as yourself as you usually are, and in a way maybe that you want to be perceived, and
That's
also internally that you want to feel more relaxed or more okay with being yourself, okay with being here. Is that, I'm sort of reading between the lines, but is that right?
yeah. I think that's exactly right. I
Okay.
think so. I'm glad you asked that question, right? Because so I have like a baseline of how well spoken I am, right? So
Right.
I want to be at least at my baseline, but ideally better, right? So, but and then when I watched my last episode, I felt like I was, at least in my opinion, I think I was worse than my baseline. I was less well spoken than I normally am.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Um, so and right, as I mentioned earlier, my baseline is being a um, uh, English as a second language, right? My baseline has some grammatical error, so there's already some insecurity there, and so being in this, putting myself out in public, right? So it brings some insecurity. Um, so
Mhm.
I think the way the way I've been processing it is largely from a cognitive behavioral therapy framework, right? So that's kind of the approach that I use. So with CBT, there's a cognitive component, there's a behavioral component. So when I think about the cognitive components, like what are the thoughts that are kind of bothering me, right? I think one is the thoughts that's driving the anxiety, right? It's like I will come across as being inarticulate, right? In the future episode, right? This will happen again. Um, and I think the other related one is like I should be articulate, right? I am doing a podcast, so I should be articulate. I should know my topic really well. I should present myself really well. And so there's like a should there. And I think the other one is like I written notes, and I had this also should that like I should not look at my notes.
Hmm. Mhm.
So um and so this I felt myself in the last episode that there's a part of me that really wants to be articulate, right? This kind of striving. And also like, hey, I don't want to look at my notes. I'm gonna come across as like very smooth.
Mhm.
um, and I want to, and I think, and there's another one which is maybe comparing myself to you, right? So I think you're very articulate, right?
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you.
So I want to like, hey, I want to be, maybe as articulate as David,
Uh,
right? So, or maybe, and obviously I know I'm not, or at least I don't think I am,
well, I
and
mean,
so
given that I'm a native speaker, like you said, that's a
exactly right. That you're
tough reach, right?
right, right. So I think there's a little bit of that feeling of inadequate, like, oh, I'm not as articulate as David, right? So maybe worrying about how other people perceive me, and that they might be comparing me with you, right? That,
Mhm.
oh, like David is articulate, Liang is not, right? So I have this like concern about this, the listener's perception of me.
Mhm. Do you want me to hop in here, or do you have
Yeah. So
more
yeah,
thoughts, or you want to
yeah,
share?
that's kind of how I kind of conceptualize or kind of break down like why I felt so nervous. Um, yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear like how what are your, do you have any follow up questions, or how do you think about this?
Yeah, so I like you, I guess, also using this as an example to show sort of how you can um, get to some of the thoughts that are underlying the feelings we have, because, like you said, there's usually some reason, there's some logic that explains why we get anxious at certain times and not at others. Um, I think, the first question that comes up for me, Liang, is about uh, what- like the question of being articulate or not, and how that's perceived by other people, what would happen? And this is called various different things in different like schools of psychotherapy. But what might happen that you fear or that you would be upset by if you weren't articulate, or what great thing might happen if you were articulate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think, so the thing that I hope for, right, is that
Yeah.
people will be maybe very kind of egotistically, right? It's like I want people to be impressed by me, right?
Mm.
And also, again, you can say this maybe selfishly. It's like I want to grow this podcast, right? I want to have more listener, and that requires me being likable or articulate and coming across as an expert, right? So an expert is someone who's, can speak very smoothly about their topic. Um, and so that's sort of what I hope for. And what I worry is that I won't be able to do that, right? That are by being inarticulate, we won't be able to help people and grow our listener, our audience.
And which of those, so you mentioned a couple of things, one about growing the audience, having a bigger podcast, and
Right.
one about being seen as an expert and sort of being admired. I think, I'm not sure if that was the word
Yeah.
used.
No, I think
Which of those holds more kind of emotional weight? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's a good way to kind of tease it out. I want to say that as I am older, that I care less about what other people think, right? So if people think I'm inarticulate, if people think I suck, right? It's like, okay, if that's what you think, that's fine. So I think maybe I want more of hey, I really want to grow our viewership, right? So, and if I can be this quote unquote articulate psychologist, right, people won't tune in. People will, well, my gosh, he sucked. Like, I don't want to listen to this anymore, right?
uh-huh. And what would it mean, or how would it feel for you if people didn't tune in?
Uh,
Why is that important in your
yeah,
mind?
yeah. So that's a deeper question that goes to like why we started the podcast, and I think there is, I guess it goes down to this deeper questions like why am I doing this podcast, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think there is, for sure, wanting to make an impact, right? Wanting to help people, by sharing about our lives and how we cope with that. And also, I think there is maybe deep down, right? There is, as much as I said, just like I don't care about what other people think of me, I think I do.
Uh-huh.
I want to be. It would feel good to my maybe ego, right? If there are, maybe hundreds or thousands of people who listen to our episode, right?
Uh-huh. And I hope it's okay that I keep sort of digging in this
Yeah.
direction. Let me
Okay.
know if you're not into it. And
I feel really vulnerable now, but I think I'm
yeah.
good with that.
So if you like find that feeling inside of yourself, this sort of like yearning for people to admire you or think of you as an expert or think you're great, do you have a sense of like, I mean, if I were in therapy, I'd probably, one of the things we do in therapy is we want to make sure that we're working on this in the real thing. It's hard to explain, but sometimes we can kind of trick ourselves in our mind. So I might, to make sure we're working in the right area, I might ask you like where you feel this in your body to really make sure we're sort of like accessing the correct, in the literature, it's the memory network, the place where this.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to do
No,
that or.
I think that's actually really interesting because I approach this kind of issues differently with my clients. So I'm actually really curious to hear how you approach it. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, yeah. So in my work, because sometimes you can kind of circle around talking cognitively, and I do cognitive behavioral therapy too. It's not that I don't do that sometimes, but the body and emotions don't lie as much. We can't trick ourselves as easily.
Right.
So, I don't know if you want to, for instance, see if you can feel in terms of the sensations in your body. And maybe even like go back, imagine the last podcast we did, or right afterwards, wherever you really felt that anxiety.
I mean, I feel that even now. So
Okay. Not hard to access. What does it feel like inside of you? This, either the fear of not being liked and approved of, or the.
Well, I think in terms of where I feel it in my body, I feel it like in my chest, or in my stomach, probably the most. Like there's a little bit. It's almost like the butterfly, right? That so kind of tenseness, or a little bit of like a lot of like energy, but like it's kind of like a frazzle kind of energy.
And is there, as you hold that in your mind, as you pay attention to it, is there any like emotional component to it? Like in CBT, sometimes they call this like an underlying emotion, that when we have anxiety, sometimes underneath it is some deeper, more potent or direct emotion.
I think, right. So I think anxiety or worry is, I put that as a primary emotion, like that fight or flight response. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, yeah, I mean, how I work often is, it sounds like there's a little bit of a difference here between how we approach things. There is the direct emotion of fear.
Right.
Sometimes what's underneath is actually fear.
Right.
Sometimes, in my experience, when I feel anxiety, underneath, it's almost like the anxiety is this warning, like, oh, stay away from that thing. And maybe that thing, that underlying emotion, is deep sadness or anger or desperation. And so I wonder if underneath the anxiety, and maybe there isn't, right? I mean, this is the other thing I just want to point out as psychologists in our work.
Yeah, right. I think, that's a interesting, because when I think of my approach, right? So the anxiety is fear, right? And in my case, right, it's fear of, and if I break out specifically what I fear, right, it's fear of judgment, right? Fear of maybe being, maybe even ostracized, right? Like, hey, I don't like this person, right? I don't want to work with this person. And maybe there's like some humiliation, like if I'm, coming across as inarticulate, right? There's a feeling of maybe being like people laughing at me, right? So that feeling of humiliation, right? So
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah, and it sounds like there's, even if it's, humiliation and fear or anxiety are kind of related, but this is a kind of a deeper, more textured experience.
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
wonder.
agree. Yeah.
What I was going to say before is, sometimes also in our work, and this is with you, Liang, as well today, sometimes we ask questions, or we wonder if there's something underneath. Sometimes there's not anything underneath, and that's okay. Like, we don't always know where we're going or what the
Well,
right
I think that's a
direction is.
really good point, because I think what you're saying is that even though in this particular instance, right, I said earlier that like, hey, I don't really care what people think of me, but it does perhaps tap into some emotion that were very salient or dominant when I was younger, right? Maybe in my 20s or when I first came to the US, right? And I definitely had those emotions of being, humiliated, being excluded, um, and being make fun of. Right? So I definitely had those really strong feelings when I was younger, and so I think it's quite possible that this experience of doing a podcast, right, brings about those emotions, even though maybe at a very intellectual level, I feel like, well, these are two very different situations, and I'm more mature and more, I care less, right, that about what other people think, but it still brings up those emotions.
So it's like almost like the present event triggers these old feelings that are maybe not totally
Yeah,
processed
yeah,
from
yeah.
middle school or high school about and it was there stuff, I just out of curiosity, like was there stuff around language? Like am I being judged by because I don't know the language as well or
Well, I think, um, if I think back, well, there's definitely a lot of has to do with. I think language is one of them, though not the most, the biggest one. Right, it probably had to do with like the clothes that I wear, um,
uh-huh.
and how assimilated or not assimilated I was. But language is definitely a certain component of that. Um, and so, yeah, so I think it's interesting. So I'll just, maybe this is a good um, time to kind of transition out of the me being patient and therapy and process a little bit. But I think so. You do. So I think the way you approach it, right, you start to connect it with things that happened in the past, and is that where you will?
uh,
Where
it's not always the past, but we find where this is real, where
you,
this is organic or alive, where it's not just a thinking cognitive thing, but where it is a living entity inside of the person, and
mm,
then we see what's there. And sometimes that is about the present moment and what's happened right now. Sometimes that's about the past. Sometimes it's about the future. You know, people fear things that could happen in the future. So, you know, it's I have less of a preconception about what's there, but
mm,
yeah, I try to dial into and we you can get there. You can get there through thinking, but you can also it helps. You know, I try to do it on multiple levels to make sure we're really accessing the where this is a real phenomenon
I
for
see.
people.
So it sounds like if we keep going with this session, like you would make me cry.
As an old supervisor of mine said, you don't get extra points for crying, but you know they're not taken up. So maybe it
Yeah,
does it feel like that as we talk about it that it's like
yeah,
there's
yeah. No,
an emotion.
I think you're right that if I start to access that way, it does bring
Yeah,
up those like old emotions that are
yeah,
alive, right? And if I were to start to get in touch with that, right, I think I would become more emotional, and
yeah,
perhaps crying.
yeah,
Now, honestly, I don't know if it's something that I even experience a lot, even in therapy myself, right, as a patient. Uh,
yeah,
um, and yeah, so I obviously I don't want to turn this episode into a therapy session, um,
yeah.
but
Can I? I'm sorry.
go
Go ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I have one more thread that I want to ask about. Not
Yeah, yeah.
more related to you and me than to you and your past. But I don't know if there was more you were going to say there.
No, no, go ahead.
Okay. um, well, you mentioned the part about me, about comparing yourself to me.
Right.
Um, and we have a history too, I guess we could go into also.
Right.
Um, that what our relationship has been like over the years, or the times when you felt safe with me or less safe with me, or
Mhm.
I'm sure I've said and done things that have not made you feel safe sometimes,
Hmm.
that I'm sorry for.
Ah.
Um, but I wonder, like, now, if there's anything that you need from me, or
Hmm.
anything that I can do. I notice inside of myself like an empathic response, even the feeling of like, oh, I want to be less articulate
Right.
when
Right.
I'm
That's a
talking to
really
help you.
that's a
But
really good that's a really
yeah.
good question, because I actually thought about, like, okay, should I ask you or my friends, a close friend, to, like, hey, can you watch this episode and tell me,
Mhm.
and can you reassure me that I did a good job?
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, I feel like, well, is that even a valid question? Like, because, I that if the person says that, "Oh, I think you did a good job," I think you did fine. Like, I don't think people will think negatively of Leo. I actually feel like, well, are you telling me the truth, or are you just making me feel better? So it's like,
Uh-huh.
well, what's the point of asking that question if I don't think they will tell me the truth, right? Um, and if they tell me the truth, like, would that make me feel better? Like, no. Right? So,
I'm like, you were below your baseline, Liang. Like,
right.
you'd be like, yeah, I know, it's terrible.
So when you ask this question, it's like, what help would I benefit from? Like, what kind of help do I need from you? Right? I actually not sure how to answer that question.
Yeah, or like, is there anything I could do? Yeah, I don't know. Is there any way that I could be here for you, or that I could help you around this? Maybe
Yeah.
it's before our session,
Right,
sessions,
right.
sessions before our podcast, or
At the,
during the podcast,
yeah,
or
well, I think at a fundamental level, right, I do want you to see me as, like, hey, regardless of what a terrible presenter you are, you still I still like you, and I still want to do this podcast with you, right?
uh-huh.
So I guess that would be helpful,
Yeah. Do
right?
you want me to respond to that?
Yeah, yeah.
Liang, one of the biggest reasons that I do this podcast is because and this is backstory for folks who are watching, but Liang and I went to grad school together. We spent a lot of time together. It's funny. I actually we spent a lot of summers swimming in the pool and then chatting. I just started swimming again. I thought of you. Um, but we're in different states, so I don't get to see you much anymore.
Mm.
And as much as I like the podcast, really the part I like the most is getting to be with you, is getting to spend time with you, and that's like totally independent of how articulate you are, or how articulate, or even if anybody watches this ever, is like really just, it's like a way to get to know you and get to be with you again. That's what I enjoy most about it.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I really, really appreciate that. I feel the same way too, like that.
How is that to hear?
That was really. It felt really nice. I felt definitely warm and safe and seen. Um, I think that felt really, really good.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, I mean, not to, this could go on for a long time. We could talk about a relationship, but uh, I have sadness about sort of our distance over the years, and so I'm really grateful for the chance to get to do this with you, to be with you. I really, this is Liang's idea, by the way. So if you like the podcast, thank Liang. If you don't like the podcast, you can blame Liang. No, I'm joking. But no,
Yeah.
yeah. No,
Well, thank you. Thank you.
yeah.
I think that's very reassuring, right? To
Yeah.
know that, hey, even if I suck as a podcaster, our podcast, only grow to, like, maybe less than 100 views per episode, right? That
Right.
we will still do this together, right?
Yes.
So that,
That's
that,
my
that
plan.
that's actually very, very reassuring, and that like, hey, like we could really suck, or I could really suck, and that's okay.
Yeah. Which is like sort of speaking to that there's worth in doing things you're really bad at. It's also, I have to say, it's funny for you to ask me if you did a good job,
Yeah.
as if I know anything about making podcasts. I was like, after our last episode, I was like, should I ask Chat GPT like how to make a good podcast? Because I have like no idea about that. So.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so I wonder if this is a good time to um, end our episode. Now, there's obviously a lot more we can talk about. Like, for example, how I've been thinking about it from like a cognitive perspective. But I really like your approach, right? Which is actually understanding the emotion that's actually alive, right? Which actually does, well, almost always connect to something that happened in the past. But what part of the past that is still alive right now in the present, right? Yeah, I really like that approach. And so maybe in a future episode, we can talk more about, I'm sure it will come up, right? The from a cognitive perspective, right? What are some techniques? And a lot of it is based on like, it's almost like having a dialogue, right, with this negative part of yourself, right? This people, the part of me that says like, hey, you will come across as inarticulate, or you shouldn't be articulate, or you're not as articulate as David, right? So there's probably these negative thoughts that are maybe happening in the background, and so part of the cognitive therapy is to really to be to one is to um, bring out or tease out this negative voice in a more concrete way, and usually that means like writing them down, and then actually having a conversation, right? Uh, and also recognizing, I think part of this coping with my anxiety is recognizing that this anxiety is also appropriate, right? Hey, I want the desire to come across as to be like, right? That's actually a very basic human desire, and that's actually appropriate, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
okay. It's okay to feel nervous. Yeah,
yeah, that's part of the reason I asked about your goal at the beginning, because it's possible that you don't need to do anything differently or better, and that it may just be okay to
right,
not be great at things for a while,
right.
which is kind of necessary when
Yeah,
starting something new like we are.
yeah. And
Uh,
then from a behavior perspective, right? One is that, hey, like one is like, hey, I shouldn't avoid this thing that I fear, right? So even though I feel really nervous, right, my desire is like, maybe I shouldn't do this anymore, right? But to still continue to do the podcast, but with a growth mindset, right? So hey, it's okay to make mistakes. That's part of the learning, and um, and it's okay to make mistakes, right? The goal is to improve, um, and that process, that timeline could stretch out to many episodes.
yeah.
And then also I thought about maybe it's okay to look down and look at my notes. I think I shouldn't have this expectation that like I should not look down and look at my notes. It's okay to look at my notes.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you bringing up, Liang, that there are lots of different ways to approach challenges you're having inside of yourself. Not you, but everybody.
Yeah,
And it's helpful even for us who have like been to grad school for many more years than we wish were the case,
right,
to ask for help from somebody else and
right.
try somebody else's approach and see how that
That's right.
how that works. So
Yeah.
I still consult. It's funny about anxiety. I was just reading like last night this CBT guy, David Burns's book, When Panic Attacks, which I love, and I don't do a ton of CBT, but sometimes it's really helpful. So, it's sometimes in the field there's a lot of argument about types of therapy and which is better for what, and the truth is people can get benefit from a wide variety of them. And so my thinking is I appreciate us kind of looking at this from some different perspectives, because I think probably more than one is helpful.
Yeah, that's part of, I really enjoyed this discussion too. And part of the reason why I want to do this podcast is because we don't have the time to actually really talk about therapy. Because both you're very busy, and it's hard to find time. So so in the interest of time, we'll end the episode here, and I'm sure you will learn more about me and David, about our lives, and about how we approach therapy in the future, in the future episodes.
Sounds great. Thanks, Liang.
All right.